I think Congress should act on it and act on it now, and it would be immediate relief. And they should do so without increasing the deficit. Two sources of funding for this. One would be the remaining stimulus funds that I think should be redirected toward these kinds of immediate private sector job creation proposals. And second, there's about $250 billion remaining in the TARP funds. This money has been appropriated but not yet spent. My view is that instead of more bailouts to Wall Street banks that are viewed as too big to fail, I believe that relief should go directly to small businesses that are going to help get us out of this recession. The small businesses right here in Ohio that I think are too small to fail because of the key role they're going to play in getting our economy back on track. I think TARP should be ended. I think it should be ended now before it becomes a slush fund for picking further winners and losers. Incidentally, Democrats in the Senate are now moving in the opposite direction on payroll tax, contemplating an increase in the Medicare payroll tax. Not to save Medicare, by the way. You could argue that you need to take steps to save Medicare, and certainly the Medicare payroll tax funds part of Medicare, but instead for this new entitlement. So while I'm suggesting a one-year tax holiday to spur productivity and growth in Washington, they want to raise payroll taxes, putting additional burdens on job growth. Washington should also provide immediate expensing for small businesses, making permanent the ability to write off new equipment, which will create jobs and certainty. Another tax that should be eliminated is the federal unemployment tax. Unemployed workers are now able to receive 99 weeks, nearly 2 years of benefits, which puts a lot of stress on the state's declining negative balances in our unemployment trust fund. Ohio's unemployment insurance tax increases when that trust fund reaches a certain level, and businesses are paying it. That's not a recipe for success, that during a recession you're increasing the taxes. The federal government could help ease this burden on Ohio employers immediately by suspending the federal unemployment tax. This saves about $56 per worker per year, $7 billion cost, but again, it should be offset by excess stimulus and TARP funds. Another way to promote consumption and stimulate demand for workers here in Ohio is by increasing exports, by simply selling more of what our manufacturers make, what our farmers grow, and what our service providers provide, and getting it out there to the 95% of consumers who do not live in the United States. Reporters should take note of this. This is where Governor Strickland and Lieutenant Governor Lee Fisher and I agree. Exports are good for Ohio. Ohio's exports linked to manufacturing are now the third highest in the country. Ohio exports nearly 300,000. Ohio exports support nearly 300,000 jobs. Think about that. In fact, it's about 25% of all factory jobs in Ohio. And these jobs have better benefits, and they pay better. Over 11,000 Ohio companies now export, and 1 of every 3 acres planted in Ohio is now planted for export. Even more impressive, Ohio is the only state to have experienced rising exports for each of the last 11 years, including about a 7% increase last year during a tough economy. This is good for Ohio, $45 billion worth of exports. It means more jobs. It means more jobs for Ohio's factory workers, service providers, and farmers. I'm encouraged by recent comments made by President Obama about the importance of increasing exports. And in the Jobs Summit yesterday, this discussion came up about how do you get more exports going. President Obama has said that increasing U.S. exports by just 1% would create 250,000 new jobs. It's true. Ohio needs to export more of its goods and products, not less. If the president wanted to create those jobs right away, by the way, hundreds of thousands of new jobs, all he would have to do would be to send to Congress the trade opening agreements with Colombia, with Panama, and with Korea that have already been negotiated, and that everyone agrees who's looked at them will create additional export opportunities for United States and Ohio workers. If he did that, sent it to Congress and supported it, we could have those in place and immediately create hundreds of thousands of new jobs in this country. So that's one area where we can move and move quickly. Next, we need to move quickly to be sure small businesses have access to capital. I'm sure those of you who are in small business in this room and those of you who represent small businesses hear this a lot. I certainly do. I was in Cleveland earlier this week meeting with some small business folks and talking about all these issues we talked about, and they said, Rob, we agree with you on all that, but unless we have access to capital, it's really tough. And if you can't get a loan, it's hard to expand plant and equipment and hire people. We need to move and move quickly because some of these small businesses are making a decision whether they're going to be able to stay in business or not. Despite the fact that small businesses represent about 95% of Ohio companies, and despite the fact that the Small Business Administration estimates that small businesses now create 60 to 80% of all jobs, we have not had this focus on small businesses, and particularly on the lending side. Access to loans and lines of credit, especially for small businesses, is critical. TARP did help improve the balance sheets of banks. And TARP helped a lot of big banks around the country. But it has not opened up the loans to small businesses who need it. Businesses that have good track records, businesses that have a good business plan. We should help small businesses by guaranteeing existing lines of credit, providing a pool of capital for community lenders to make credit more widely available to small businesses, and we should do it now. We also need to do more to help Ohio workers. Our Washington leaders need to spend more time focusing on the needs of our workforce if we're going to create this environment that spurs job growth. We've got to have a workforce that's capable of meeting business needs if we're going to have this private sector growth. Ohio now gets about $4 billion a year in workforce training dollars. This is delivered across over 50 programs. With an unemployment rate of 10.5%, I don't think any of us are getting a good return on that investment. Not the jobless, not the businesses, not the taxpayers. We will have a more specific proposal later in the campaign, but streamlining those job training programs, the federal programs, and collaborating more with community colleges and with the private sector is the key to using those dollars more wisely for Ohio. And it actually starts with young people getting engaged earlier in the so-called STEM disciplines, math, engineering, science, and access to work-study programs, internships. There's some great opportunities here for collaboration. Earlier this week, I was at Graph Tech, which is a great Parma company. Some of you may be familiar with it, about a $1.2 billion company that produces graphite for all kinds of high technology purposes. And they have chosen to partner with a school, public school in Cleveland called Cleveland East Tech, Cleveland's East Technical High School. They donate computers to the school, they donate furniture to the school, they've started a junior achievement program there, and they provide internships. And they work. They work in the sense that kids come, get the experience of working, particularly in a high technology environment, and then they're able to do better in terms of getting into college, but also have job skills that are then much more marketable. And Graph Tech has also hired a lot of these young people, some of whom, again, had no job experience before, and their efforts are making a difference. Our technical and community colleges need to be better plugged into the workplace demands of business so there's a better connection to provide relevant training to meet existing and future workforce needs. It's easy to say we need to do all these things. It's much harder to get them done, isn't it? And so let me give you another example of a great innovation that's happening right here in Cleveland, right down the street at the Juergens Company, which is a small manufacturer. By the way, not just surviving, but thriving in the international trade environment right now, creating stuff here that's beating their Chinese competitors, which I'm very proud of. They hire about 220 people. Juergens is not only good at their core industrial business, they won the Governor's Excellence in Exporting Award recently, but they've also started an innovative online manufacturing training program called Tooling U. Some of you are familiar with Tooling U. I've seen it in action, and it's impressive. It offers technical training and engineering classes that can be customized to meet the needs of specific employers and needs for specific classes at junior colleges, community colleges. They do it through a learning management system, and they have an extensive tracking and reporting capability so employers can use it as well. About 80,000 students have already attended Tooling U, and again, they focus on manufacturing and technology. Employers are willing to pay for it because employers are getting the kind of training that they need. It's relevant, it's timely, and because it's on the web, it's cost effective. As I travel around the state, I look to ideas like that from Tooling U so that we can talk about what works in one area of Ohio and spread it to other areas of Ohio. I also talk to a lot of Ohioans here in Northeast Ohio and around the state, but even more so here in Northeast Ohio, who are very discouraged about what they see in the economy in the future. I would tell you that it's easy to get discouraged when you look at the high unemployment numbers, you look at some of the job losses. But again, if you look at some of the exciting things that are happening, some of the innovations, you can also be optimistic. And I am optimistic about the future. If we focus on jobs, the government creating that right climate, partnering with business and communities, we can move forward. As I've toured a lot of these Northeast Ohio companies, the people I've met have told me that if they have the tools, if they have the ability, they can compete.